Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience. I'm here tonight with my full review of the Kennerton Rognir. This is the planar version. There are two versions of this headphone. The planar version, which is the more expensive of the two, and the dynamic version, which uses a dynamic driver instead of a planar magnetic driver. But anyway, I'll give you a quick look at the headphone, and this was loaned to me for review by Kennerton Audio Equipment, and they are out of St. Petersburg, Russia. The price of the Rognir Planar, and it's available in several different types of wood. The standard price on this is $3,837 US, and that would include all of the different woods, but apparently this version here is in a stabilized Carillion birch, and I just looked at their website today, and that version, or this version, the price is at $4,310 right now. It said they only have two left of this type of wood, so maybe that's why the price has gone up. This is a wired, full-size, over-the-ear, closed-back headphone, and this is the flagship of the closed-back headphones from Kennerton. This is up in approximately the same price point as the Kennerton Rognir, which is the flagship of their open back headphones, and I believe the driver used in the two are very similar. This does use a 80mm planar magnetic driver. It has an impedance of 42 ohms, a sensitivity of 100 decibels at 1 milliwatt, so this is fairly easy to drive. It's a little tougher than most dynamic headphones, but easier than most of the planar magnetic headphones I've used. It's easier to drive than most of the Hi-Fi Man headphones, similar to the new Aria, which is a lot easier to drive than the older version. Definitely easier to drive than something like the Sundara. It turns out it takes about the same amount of power to drive this as it does ZMF's new Atrium headphone, which is a dynamic driver but 300 ohms. And I was comparing the two, and they seem to be about in the same range as far as the power required to drive them. This Kennerton claims a weight of 442 grams. This particular headphone weighed in at 498 grams, but that may be because of the wood. I know that different types of wood can make quite a bit of difference in the weight of a headphone, so I'm guessing that some of the other types of wood are lighter, but this one does weigh in at 498 grams, which makes it kind of average in weight for a full-size, especially closed back headphones. Usually closed back are a little bit heavier. This headphone comes with two cables, and I'll give you a look at these. They're both about 2 meters long, and this is the standard cable. The other one is the deluxe cable. This here, it has a nice all metal 6.3 millimeter or 1/4 inch connector at the amp end. Has a nice cloth cover. It's soft and real flexible. And then at the headphone end, you've got your mini XLRs, your 4-pin mini XLR connections, which is what this headphone uses. And then the deluxe cable is a very nice cable, probably the nicest I've seen come with any headphone. It's a braided 3-wire, actually 4-wire because it's balanced. You've got your 4-pin full-size XLR connection at your amp end. Once again, this is about 2 meters long, and your 4-pin mini XLR connections at your headphone end. And this is extremely soft, extremely flexible. Like I said, very nice cable, and they do come with both of these. And then also it comes with an adapter So you can go from your 6.3 millimeter single-ended amp to 4-pin XLR, and what's nice about that is if you have the deluxe cable on the headphone and you want to switch from a balanced amp that uses 4-pin XLR to a single-ended amp with 6.3, you don't have to change the cable on the headphone. You can just plug this into the amp and use the adapter, which I've actually wanted to get one of these for a long time. It's pretty handy, especially, you're switching, say you're reviewing a headphone, and, well, either you're using a headphone, you want to try it on different amps, or if you're using a headphone to review 2 amps, it's real nice to be able to make a quick switch and not have to change cables. So this is something really handy to have around. Anyway, the headphone itself, the ear cups are made of a real wood. I'll give you a look here. And in fact, I'll move in a little bit closer here. The ear cup is a solid piece of machined wood. And I did want to show you on the back here. I'm going to try to do this without dropping these. You've got a couple little ports here with a little metal cover on them. And that acts as a vent, and I think all closed back headphones are ported or vented to some extent. But anyway, what I did notice though, if I'm listening to this and I put my fingers over those, the bass goes away almost entirely. So they are necessary to support the bass. Anyway, the yoke, it's actually one piece. The headband here is like a spring metal. It is covered with a leather cover here. You've got a self-adjusting headband. Everything, the ear cup or the ear pads, the head strap, the pad and everything are covered with very nice lambskin leather, very soft. These here are the standard ear pads that come on this headphone, and as you notice, they're not tapered, and I will talk about the Earpads quite a bit in this review because this headphone actually comes with 3 sets of ear pads, and they have quite a different sound to them. They change it a lot. It's almost like 3 different headphones, and you can, by switching ear pads, and it's really not that hard. Your first try, it might take you 10 minutes, but after you've done it a few times, you can do it in about 2 or 3 minutes. Anyway, so these ear pads are the non-tapered. They're a little bit thinner. They do have memory foam inside of them. They're very comfortable, and like I said, covered with real lambskin leather. And this headphone, like I said, average weight, but as far as wearing it, it's extremely comfortable. I have no issues at all. It has just enough clamping force that it doesn't move around if I tilt my head. It actually has quite a bit of isolation both ways. It keeps quite a bit of sound from the outside from getting in, and it keeps quite a bit of the music from getting out. I mean, you can pretty much wear these around other people and they're barely gonna hear it. A lot quieter than with an open back headphone. So anyway, before I get into the sound, I wanted to talk a little bit about the music I used and the equipment in doing this review. And I've been lucky enough to have this headphone for about 2.5 months now, and I have done a lot of listening to this headphone. It's no secret that I really enjoy this headphone, and if you saw my best of the year of 2021 video that came out back in January, I had got this headphone right before the end of 2021, and I absolutely love this headphone, and I gave it my award of Headphone of the Year. So, you know, if that's all you want to know, I guess you don't have to watch any further. I love this headphone, and in fact, it's the best headphone that I've heard to this point of all the headphones I've reviewed, but there's a few other that are close. And I do want to do a comparison of several other headphones in this video. So before I get to that though, I want to mention that the music I listen to more than anything would be acoustical music. I just like the sound of real instruments, you know, real strings, real pianos. I like female vocals. I think they're a good test of, you know, of a headphone, of the detail, of the clarity, of, you know, of whether it's neutral or, you know, on the warm side or whatever. I just really like the acoustical music. You know, other types of instruments like electronic instruments and all that, you really don't know how they should sound. So it's hard to tell if the headphone is reproducing them right, where acoustical music or acoustical instruments that you've heard live in person, you know, like the sound of piano, it's very hard to accurately reproduce the sound of a piano, and a lot of headphones just can't do it. A lot of speakers also. I mean, it sounds like a piano, but it doesn't sound natural the way it really should. So anyway, that's why I like that type of music. But I also throw in a mixture of different types of rock music, you know, some classic rock, some harder stuff, even into industrial, things like that. A little bit of pop music, a little bit of electronic music, and I try to throw a little bit of orchestral music into the mix. As far as testing equipment, I used a Cambridge Audio 540C CD player as a transport only, and the DACs I used during this review would be the Topping D70S, and that would be the newest MQA version, the Topping D90 SE, which is, as far as I know, still probably the best measuring DAC you can get. The Audio GD R8 MK2, which is a very nice R2R DAC, and the Denafrips Pontus 2, which is another R2R type DAC that actually I did a comparison just my last video of the Audio GD and the Denafrips, and I actually, as much as I like the Audio GD, I gave a slight edge at the end of the video to the Pontus. It is by Denafrips. It is a fantastic DAC. Anyway, as far as amps used in testing this headphone, I used the Audio GD Master 9, the Wells Audio Dragon, the Waveborn Edelweiss 3 Preamp Plus, which is an OTL Type 2 amp, and the Edelweiss 3 Power Amp Plus by Waveborn, which is a transformer coupled tube amp. And then I also used the Burson Conductor 3 Reference, which is a combination DAC and amp, and used it with the DAC that's built into it. And then as far as headphones I used in comparison, I probably use more, but the primary headphones I use to compare to this headphone would be starting with the LSA HP2 Ultra, and I realize that that's only about a fourth the price of this headphone, but in 2020 it was my headphone of the year. And if you don't know already, Kennerton made that headphone for LSA, and I just really, really like that headphone. I still think it's the best headphone that I've heard under $1,000. And I love the HP2 so much, it's also a closed back, that I've been wanting for a long time to hear the Rognir and see how it compared. And my hopes were that it would be similar to the HP2, but better, and that turned out to be the case. So I'll talk about that more extensively in a minute, and you know how they are different and how they compare to each other. I also compared this to the Hi-Fi Man Aria, and that would be the third version, the stealth version. And I realized that that headphone only goes for less than half the price of this, but I really like the Aria. I reviewed the first version, the version 1 that had the huge soundstage, and this one definitely doesn't have that huge soundstage. But other than that, I consider the Aria Stealth to be an almost perfect headphone. It has almost perfect tone balance. It's very much more dynamic than the older version. It has a warmer mid-range, but has exceptional detail. I've heard some people say that the Aria Stealth has even more detail than the HE1000 SE. I don't know if that's the case. I've never heard that headphone, but the Aria Stealth has exceptional clarity and detail, and that's why I thought it was worthy of throwing into a comparison with this headphone. And then also the new headphone from ZMF, the one that just became available a couple days ago, the Atrium, which is a lot like the ZMF Verite Open, and it's up in the same price range. It's become a co-flagship headphone from ZMF. And I was lucky enough to have that at the same time, and that is an absolutely incredible headphone. And it's similar in some ways, this headphone, but different. It's different than the Verite. What Verite was, it's a more neutral version with a more normal soundstage. The Verite Open has sort of an unusual soundstage. It kind of wraps around your head. But this is, the Atrium is more conventional, so I want to do a comparison of that to the Kennerton Rognir. And then last of all, Kennerton's flagship open back headphone is the Thror. And up until I got a hold of this headphone to review, that was without a doubt my favorite headphone. And now this headphone has given the Thror some serious competition for my favorite, and I'm actually kind of leaning towards this as being my favorite, but I did do some pretty extensive comparing of the two the other night, because I figure, you know, if someone wants to put this kind of money into a headphone, you know, the Thror might be another option on their list. And, you know, it's being an open back instead of a closed back. So I did compare the two, and they're similar in some ways and different in others. So I will let you know how the two of those compare to each other. But right now, I'm going to take a break, and I will be back in a few minutes with the rest of this video, and we'll talk about the sound. Well, my break ended up being about 2 hours, had some dinner, and now I'm going to try to remember where I left off, but I think I was about to talk about the sound of this headphone. But before I can really talk about the sound, I need to talk about the earpads that come with this headphone, because the one I received came with 3 sets of earpads. The ones that were on it, and 2 other sets. And when I did my first impressions video, I wasn't sure if all of them come that way or what. But I, a couple weeks ago, watched a review of the same headphone, the Rognir Planar, done by Z Reviews, and he had the same 3 sets of earpads that I did. So I'm going to assume that these come with 3 sets of earpads. I'm not absolutely positive, so don't take my word for it, or contact Kennerton if you didn't get your 3 sets. It's maybe because we're reviewers that maybe it's possible we got extra earpads. But anyway, I showed you the pads that were on the headphone. And these are a non-tapered, slightly thinner earpad. All 3 sets are made of lambskin leather, and all 3 use memory foam inside, where the older Kennerton earpads didn't use memory foam. It was it was a more springy foam, where the memory foam, when you squeeze it, it releases slower. That's basically how you can tell. But anyway, so it came with that set of pads, and then it came with this set here, and I believe, and I'm not positive, I believe these are called the ECL CMFP, and I think the MF part of that stands for memory foam. But anyway, these are wait, I think I have the wrong ones. No, I have the right ones. Okay, these are shaped and look exactly like the Kennerton ECL01 ear pads. They're a lambskin leather, they're tapered from front to back, and these have perforations in it, and these are the larger perforations similar to the ECL01 pads. The difference is these have memory foam in them. And I tried these, and I believe I did watch the Z review review of this headphone, and I think that he liked these the best. And these wouldn't be my first choice, but anyway, I did want to show you these, and I'll tell you briefly how the three of these change the sound, because they do change the sound substantially. Anyway, then the other set, and these are the Rognir dynamic pads, the same pads that come on the dynamic version of this headphone. And once again, they're lambskin leather, they're tapered, and they look exactly like the other Kennerton pads, but these have no perforations at all. And these, once again, are memory foam. And as far as I know, these are called dynamic pads. So anyway, the difference that it makes, and I'll start with these. These are the perforated tapered pads. These produce the most neutral sound. And like I said, I mean, this headphone sounds like three completely different headphones depending on which ear pads you use. It just makes a huge difference in the tone balance, and even makes a little bit of difference in the sound stage and all that. So I'll start with these, the tapered perforated pads, and these produce the most neutral sound. Basically, nothing is emphasized, but the headphone still has really good sub bass. The mid bass is just kind of neutral, the mids are kind of neutral, all the way through the highs. With these pads, you will get the brightest highs of the three pads, and I would say you get just a slightly larger sound stage with these than with the standard pads, the non-tapered pads. But I would just say pretty much dead neutral, but still has good sub bass. And I would say with these ear pads, the headphone actually sounds very similar to the LSA HP2, which I'm going to compare the Rognir to that headphone in a few minutes. But anyway, these do produce the most neutral sound. So if you're looking for a very neutral headphone, but it has very good extension into the sub bass, and not an emphasized sub bass, but just it goes really deep, and has some weight to the sub bass, more so than just about any other headphone I've heard. Okay, now I want to talk about the standard pads. That would be the ones that come on the headphone. They're non-tapered, and these are the middle of the road as far as the three pads are concerned. What these will give you is, first of all, outstanding sub bass. With the standard pads, the Rognir Planar flat out has the best sub bass I've heard from any headphone ever. It has the most extension going down the deepest, and it's got a lot of weight behind the sub bass. It's very tight, it's very well controlled, and it has a lot of texture in it, a lot of detail in it, and it's just flat out the best sub bass I've heard. I always thought the LSA HP2 had great sub bass. Well, this is a significant step up into better sub bass than the HP2. This is just the best sub bass I've heard. I've heard headphones that have a ton of bass, but it wasn't as tight, it wasn't as controlled. So with the standard ear pads, outstanding sub bass, good mid bass, a little bit of emphasis on the mid bass, a little bit of punch, a little bit dynamic, but not what I would not a bass head headphone. It's got good mid bass, and but it's not highly emphasized. It's up a few decibels from neutral. The mid-range becomes a little bit, slightly on the warm side of neutral. It warms up female vocals a little bit over the previous Earpads that I showed you. Compared to neutral, like compared to, I would consider, like, most Hi-Fi Man headphones would be pretty neutral, or the LSA HP2 pretty neutral. I would say the mids are just slightly on the warm side from there. It tames down the treble just a tiny bit compared to the tapered pads with the perforations. So if you think if you're looking for bright treble, the tapered perforated pads are probably your best bet. These tame down the treble just a little bit, put it about average, I would say it's very close to the treble of the Hi-Fi Man Sandara, not the Sandara, the Aria Stealth. Maybe just slightly tamed down from there. Very similar to the treble on the ZMF Atrium, which is one of the other headphones I want to compare this to. But anyway, the soundstage is really, really good with the standard pads. It has a lot of width, pretty decent depth. What is unbelievable about this headphone is that even with a closed back headphone, these have the soundstage width of most open back headphones. I mean, there's very few open back headphones that actually have a wider soundstage than this headphone has, which amazes me. But the LSA HP2 also had a very unusually wide soundstage for a closed back headphone. And with the standard pads, you lose just a slight little bit of soundstage width compared to the tapered perforated pads, but it's still really good. I mean, you've got a lot of soundstage width, similar to, you know, a good open back headphone, decent depth, and it's just all around an excellent choice. The only reason you wouldn't want that is if you are leaning towards being a bass head and want some more bass, then maybe go with the dynamic pads, which I'll talk about just a second here. The dynamic pads, like I said, they're wrong ones. They're a tapered pad, but they don't have any perforations, and that normally gives a headphone a little bit more bass. So with these, what you get is a pretty significant increase in the sub bass and the mid bass both compared to the standard pads. And it really, I mean, but you don't lose any of the tightness, you don't lose the control, and it just gives you the best, I mean, just incredible sub bass and mid bass, but without bleeding into the mid-range, without overwhelming the mid-range. I've heard headphones that had a lot of bass, but it just kind of drowns everything out. It overwhelms the lower mids, the middle mids, even sometimes up in, you know, getting into the lower treble. The bass can just be so overwhelming that it just kind of covers everything up. And this headphone doesn't do that. Even with these pads, you've got a ton of bass, but yet it just sounds completely separate from the rest of the music. It's almost like having a speaker system with subwoofers that, you know, are putting out a bunch of bass, but it doesn't seem to affect the other speakers, like it's, you know, coming from a separate place. So anyway, the other thing these do is it gives you a nice, very warm, very lush, very, what's the word I'm looking for? A very rich mid-range. I really noticed it in female vocals. Gives them a really nice richness, which is similar to what you get from the ZMF Verite Open. That was the one thing I really liked about that headphone, was the way female vocals sounded, just rich, liquid, and beautiful. Another headphone that sounds like that would be the Kennerton Odin. That's a 2019 version. Really warm, lush mid-range, and that's what you get with these Earpads. But it doesn't make it a dark headphone. It still has significant extension in the treble. It tames it down a little tiny bit from the other pads, but the treble still has good extension, good sparkle. Bells and chimes and everything still have that ring to them. And to tell you the truth, when I first got this headphone in, I switched over to these and left it with these for a long time. I really, really like the sound. It was and I'm not what I would consider a bass head, but that deep, solid bass was just addictive. If you've heard the ZMF Verite, you know what I'm talking about, but it's even more so. It goes deeper, it hits harder, it's got more slam, and it's even tighter and more controlled. It's just the best bass I've ever heard from any headphone, period. So I actually love these, but I did find the bass slightly overwhelming at times. If music already had a lot of bass to it, and one example I can give you is most Madonna music. Most Madonna music has a pretty heavy bass track in it, and with these, it just at times gets a little overwhelming to me. It just seems like a little bit too much. So what I really like using these for is like older classic rock, where most classic rock doesn't have a lot of sub bass to it, but they do. Most of it has decent mid bass, but it's not up on the level a lot of us have gotten used to with more modern music. And with a neutral headphone, a lot of classic rock can just sound kind of flat and boring, and this just brings it to life. It makes it stand out. One of the groups that I notice that on is listening to older Rush, back Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, albums like that. I noticed that with these, the bass guitar just really stood out, really, instead of being part of the background, moved up front and got your attention. And the same thing with, the drums, the kick drums and stuff, just had that impact and the dynamics, and it just brought the music to life. So I love these for older classic rock. I listen to a lot of 80s new wave with a lot of synthesizer music and all that, and love these the bass these have with the new wave type stuff. But if I get into most acoustical music, get into jazz, get into orchestral, probably the standard pads, which are the middle of the three pads, are probably the best option. It's a really great headphone either way, but if you want it to be a little leaning towards a bass head headphone, these pads will make it that, and the standard pads are going to give you basically neutral with just incredible sub bass. So I honestly, between the three ear pads, and they're really easy to change. They've got this little lip on there, and it's a little bit tough at first until you know what you're doing. The first time you try changing the set, you'll probably mess up a few times. You'll get a little frustrated, and it'll take you 10 minutes. But after you've done it a few times, 2-3 minutes to change a pair of ear pads. So it's pretty simple. So anyway, between the three ear pads, I really can't see how anyone could not like this headphone in one of the three possible ways. But anyway, I wanted to give a quick sort of comparison between the Rognir Planar and 4 other headphones. And the 4 that I picked are 4 that I had here to compare to. And the first is the LSA HP2 Ultra, which I explained earlier. I love that headphone. It was my headphone of the year. If I could make any changes to that headphone, I'd like a slightly warmer mid-range and a little bit more mid-bass punch to it. And with the standard pads on this, that's exactly what this headphone does. It is a much better version of the HP2. If you like the HP2, you will absolutely love this headphone with the standard Earpads. It just does everything better. It has better sub-bass extension, better weight to the sub-bass, better mid-bass with more punch and more dynamic, slightly warmer mid-range, but without losing any detail. If you've heard the HP2 Ultra, you know it is an extremely detailed headphone, but can sound a little bit dry, a little analytical. This headphone, the Rognir Planar, has just as much detail, but in a warmer, less analytical, more liquid, richer way. It's just more pleasant in my opinion. And the HP2 Ultra has an incredible soundstage width for a closed headphone. This is even better. It has an even bigger soundstage. Not only a little bit more width, but a little more depth too. And like I said, and it's not a small improvement. This headphone costs 4 times what the HP does, but you know, and I'm not going to say it's 4 times as good, but it is much, much better. It is taking an excellent headphone and just improving it in every single way. Compared to the Hi-Fi Man Aria, and this would be the V3 Stealth version. First of all, I want to tell you that I love that headphone in almost every way. I think that it is a huge improvement over the version 1 as far as tone balance, bass, many other things, but what it lost was that huge soundstage, okay? As far as I'm concerned, the Aria Stealth has almost perfect tone balance. It has very good sub bass. It's got a really nice punch to the mid bass with some weight to it. It's got a nice warm but super detailed mid range. It's got great extension in the treble with a lot of sparkle. The only flaw that headphone has is it lost the huge soundstage of the V1. If they could have made these changes and kept that soundstage, it would be, in my opinion, an almost perfect headphone and hard for any headphone of any price to beat, because they also improved the detail over the original Aria. This one just has incredible detail. So anyway, but like I said, the one problem is the soundstage. And the more I listen to that headphone, I realized that a lot of people say it has a really narrow soundstage. And that's the way it sounds to me too, until I really listened to it. And I realized that the instruments actually have decent width to them. They're actually getting out there a little ways. It isn't what I'd consider narrow. It's not near as wide as the original Aria, but it's not terrible. But what it makes it sound so narrow and kind of claustrophobic to me is vocals are so focused right in the middle that they almost sound like they're in mono. The vocals almost sound like it doesn't even have a stereo effect to it, like they're just right there in the dead center and almost have a mono sound, where like the Rognir here, the vocals wrap around my head and definitely have a stereo sound to them. So that's the one thing I don't like about the Hi-Fi Man. But comparing the two, the Hi-Fi Man has great sub bass. The Rognir, and this would be with the standard pads, has even better sub bass. With the standard pads though, the Hi-Fi Man, I have to give it credit, it has a little bit more weight and a little bit more punch to the mid bass than the Rognir does. Okay, the mids are very similar, but I would say the Aria once again has a slight advantage with a slightly warmer but yet very detailed mid-range and very good treble. They're real close, but with the standard pads, I actually, like I said, the Hi-Fi Man has a little more punch to the mid bass and slightly warmer mids. Okay, if I switch over to the tapered non-perforated pads, now the Rognir has way better sub bass than the Aria, actually has more mid bass punch and weight, and actually has warmer mid range than the Aria does, but yet still has all the detail of the Aria. And the Aria has incredible detail. And that's the thing about this Rognir, the detail is up there with any headphone I've ever heard. I have not heard another headphone that I can say has more detail. I mean, the Aria Stealth, the detail is incredible. So the Aria Stealth, in my opinion, is kind of in between the Rognir with the standard pads and the Rognir with the tapered non-perforated pads. You can, with the standard pads, the Rognir's a little less warm, a little cooler than the Aria, but with the tapered, that would be the dynamic pads. With the dynamic pads, it's actually a little bassier and a little warmer, but still has all the details. So you can basically put the Rognir by switching ear pads on either side of the Aria as far as tone balance. A couple weeks ago, I got the ZMF Atrium in, which is their flagship headphone. It's an open back. It's about the same price as the Verite Open, but it has a different sound. It's a more neutral headphone with a more conventional soundstage that goes a lot wider. Comparing the two, okay, don't get me wrong, the ZMF is an incredible headphone, and if it wasn't for the Rognir, I'd probably say it's the best sounding headphone I've ever heard. Unfortunately, for the Atrium, I had the Rognir first, but it does give some serious competition to the Rognir for quite a bit money less. The ZMF doesn't have the sub bass extension that the Rognir does. Even with the Rognir, with the standard pads, it still has better extension and more weight to the sub bass. The ZMF actually has slightly more mid bass weight and punch than the Rognir does with the standard pads, but if I switch over to the dynamic pads, then the Rognir has way more sub bass and more mid bass weight and punch. Okay, the Atrium has a mid-range that's slightly warmer than the Rognir with the standard pads, but switching to the dynamic pads, the Rognir becomes a little bit warmer. And either way, I'd say the Rognir has a slight edge over the Atrium in detail and clarity. The Atrium, I can't compare directly to the Verite because I don't have the Verite anymore. It was loaned to me for review. Unfortunately, I had to return it. From what I can remember, the Atrium has more detail retrieval and better clarity than the Verite had, but the Rognir still outdoes it a little bit. But that's not taking anything away from the Atrium. It has an incredible detail, and I love the headphone, but I still have to say that I like the Rognir a little better. The sound stages are similar. The soundstage on the Rognir and the Atrium. And the Atrium has a much wider soundstage than the Verite did. But I would have to say that the Rognir still, well, I'd say they're very similar. They both have very good width. They both have very good imaging. But I would say the Rognir is slightly more precise. The Rognir is just absolute pinpoint imaging. In fact, it's the best imaging headphone I've ever heard. I've never heard of headphone to this day that has imaging that is as precise as what the Rognir does. And it doesn't really matter which earpads it has. The last headphone I wanted to compare is the Kennerton Rognir, and that's because that's Kennerton's other flagship headphone, but an open back. Okay, the Rognir flat out cannot touch the bass of the Rognir. The Rognir has way better bass extension, a lot more weight to the sub bass. The Rognir has sub bass, but it's a neutral sub bass. The Rognir has decent mid bass, but I would say it's pretty much neutral. The Rognir is very neutral except for a slightly warm mid-range, and I really like the way vocals, especially female, sound from the Rognir. They've got a nice warm liquid sound, and that's why I really like the Rognir. Okay, so the Rognir is slightly warmer in the mid-range than the Rognir with the standard pads, but if you switch to the dynamic pads, the Rognir actually has a warmer mid-range. The treble is about the same on both of them. Where the Rognir does come out on top, though, the Rognir, being an open back headphone, does have a more open sound to it, and it has slightly more width and more depth of the soundstage. The Rognir actually has the most depth of any headphone I've ever heard as far as soundstage, the sounds being out in front of me. The Rognir just can't compete with that depth of the soundstage. And like I said, the Rognir has a little bit more width and just a more open, little more of a three-dimensional sound. And I have to say, listening to jazz, listening to orchestral, even listening to most acoustical music, I actually, if it's not something that I need that bass, the sub bass, the punch, I actually prefer the Rognir over the Rognir. But in most cases, most music, I would say the Rognir is the better overall headphone. And if I had to pick one to keep, and if I could have one, I'm almost positive it would be the Rognir, because the Rognir is just good at everything, where the Rognir is exceptional at some things, but like I said, being an open back just doesn't have that sub bass extension or that mid bass punch to it that the Rognir does, even with the standard pads on the Rognir. So what does it come down to? The things I really like about the Rognir. By switching Earpads, you basically have 3 headphones in one. Oh, and I did want to mention that the Kennerton ECL02 Earpads, which have been around for a while, and I tried the Rognir with that, and the Odin and the Woden, all 3, it gave them slightly more bass, and I liked it. I tried that earpad on the Rognir, and it sounded terrible. I don't know why. It lost all its bass. It sounded like I was listening inside a tin can or something. It just sounded terrible. There was no bass at all. So the ECL02 earpads do not work on the Rognir. I don't know why, but they don't. Okay, so anyway, 3 headphones in one. The Rognir has the best sub bass, both extension wise and just tightness and control. The best sub bass I've ever heard out of any headphone. The Rognir has incredible detail, equal to or better than any other headphone I've ever heard. It has the most precise imaging I've ever heard, just absolute pinpoint imaging, where I hear small movements in certain instruments that I never noticed on any other headphone. And the best thing about the Rognir, the best thing about the Rognir is it's made me want to go back and pull out every CD I have, things I haven't listened to in years, less than perfect recordings. I want to listen to them on the Rognir. It just makes them sound so good. I've pulled out music from you know, the 80s, old new wave, stuff like that, you know, stuff that was recorded really well, like Howard Jones and things like that. Old, what do you call them? Kraftwerk from Germany. The Kraftwerk Mix album just sounded incredible on the Rognir. This stuff sounds better than I can remember it ever sounding. And Rognir makes me want to get out all these old CDs and listen to them, where some headphones you only want to listen to your, you know, top 10 or 20 best recordings, and you don't listen to anything else. So that's my favorite thing about this headphone. It makes me want to listen to everything I own. Okay, dislikes. There's only one complaint I have about this headphone. As I showed you earlier, this uses the same headband as the LSA HP2, and the Woden comes with this now, and the Odin did for a while. I think that's been discontinued. But all the less expensive headphones come with this headband, and it's light, it's comfortable. I'm not sure about this self-adjusting, how long the strap's gonna last. It's not an elastic material, it's actually plastic, I think, so it must have some sort of spring in there. I've heard people question how long that's gonna last. I don't know. It looks like it's changeable. If it weren't to last, there's some little screws in here. You could take this out. I'm sure you could get another headband from Kennerton. But anyway, so in my opinion, though, a $4,000 headphone, I think this headband should be available if someone wants it, because it is light and comfortable. But the Kennerton Rognir, which is still available, still comes with this headband, and I think this is the only Kennerton that still comes with this headband. This Rognir is, I don't know, what is this, 3.5 years old, and this has been my reference headphone for all that time. Anyway, this headband has aluminum yokes on it, and I don't know if you can see here, they've got kind of a dished out area, and this knob here screws down into that, and you can not only slide them up and down, but you can rotate them and then screw that tight and lock them exactly where you want them. Okay, this headband is without a doubt heavier. It is heavier. This probably adds 40-50 grams to the headphone, and the clamping force is a little more. But what I love about this headband is the fact that if you're not sharing the headphone, you can get this exactly where you want it, exactly the right height, get exactly the right tilt, you know, front to back, just the right amount of pressure, lock it in, and it will stay there forever. If you're sharing the headphone with someone else, then no, this isn't a good system. It's not a good setup. But also, I just really like the way this looks. I just think this is a really cool looking headband. It's completely different from anything else I've seen. And what I wish is that a headphone like the Rognir, I wish that that type of headband were available. I actually talked to the owner of Kennerton and asked him, and he said it would be impossible to do it, to put that headband on this headphone. But I'm assuming that a newer version of that headband could be made to fit this headphone, and that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see it as an option, even if it costs more. I'd like to see a headband like on the Rognir, and the Rognir still comes with that headband. You can look at their website, it's right there. And I think the Rognir is the only one that still comes with that. But the Valley, the Odin, all those used to come with that style of headband. And I just wish it was an option, because I really like that headband. And I know a lot of people don't. It's heavier. It's probably not as comfortable. But I just like the way it fits, the way it feels. You know, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like having a Russian tank parked on your head. But I like that, I guess. So I really like it. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't want to get political in this video, and I know there's a war going on right now, and I know the Kennerton headphones is out of St. Petersburg, Russia. As far as I know, they're still in business. As far as I know, they can still get headphones out. My understanding is shipping has been slowed down. They can't ship by air. I think everything has to be shipped by ground out of the country. It adds to the shipping time, and I think it adds to the shipping cost. As far as I know, they are still available and they will still be in business, and hopefully they will survive this. Like I said, I don't want to make this political, but I really don't care where they were made. I don't really care where Kennerton is located. I've liked Kennerton headphones for a long time. I think they're some of the best headphones on the planet, and I hope they're able to stay in business through all this. So anyway, do I recommend it? Yes, definitely. This is the best headphone I've ever heard. There's some that are close. The Kennerton Rognir is close. The ZMF Atrium is a great headphone. It's close. The Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth has some really great qualities, but one major weakness. I'm hoping someday I'll be able to hear some of the higher end Hi-Fi Man headphones, the HE1000 SE, maybe even someday the Susvaris, but up till this time, no. So for right now, this is the best headphone I've ever heard. I know $4,000 is a lot of money for a headphone, but if you do have the financial means, this headphone's going to be hard to beat. And it's so versatile with the 3 different sets of ear pads that you can make it sound almost any way you want. And me personally, my taste can change day to day. One day I may want the standard pads and a more neutral sound, still having that great sub bass, or I might want to go to the dynamic pads and have a headphone that's got some solid bass punch to it. Depends on what music I'm listening to and what kind of mood, but I can switch it in a couple minutes. So anyway, highly recommended. And I better wrap this up. This video's gotten extremely long. And anyway, once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And you're all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. And once again, thanks for watching my video.